Number one, let's recognize the threat. Let us appreciate the gravity of the moment that we're in. That because this is the first phase of the end of days, it means that the problems, the challenges, the catastrophes, and the disasters will intensify greatly. And that they are much worse than anything we've ever experienced in the past. Why? Because the techniques, the threats have evolved. They've become much more sophisticated than they were 50 years ago or 200 years ago. And so, number one, acknowledge the level of the threat. Acknowledge the danger that lurks. Number two, let's prepare for them. One hadith in Mustadrak al-Wasail by Al-Mirza al-Nuri radwanullahi ta'ala alayh, for instance, speaking about the end of days, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, he says, يأتي على أمتي زمان, there is going to be a time that my nation will go through where, he says, number one, الناس لا يعرفون العلماء إلا بلباس حسن. They won't be able to recognize a scholar unless that scholar is very well dressed. In other words, they, as we say colloquially, they will judge the book by its cover. They'll judge a scholar and the level of knowledge that he has in proportion to how well dressed he is, to whether or not he's wearing brand names, to how presentable he is, to how well groomed he is. Whereas we know that there is no proportionality between possessing knowledge and looking good, right? Someone who does this is a performer. Again, nobody's saying that you shouldn't wear nice clothes. But to associate these two qualities, wearing good clothes, being fashion conscious, and being a scholar, that's the disaster. That's how they will identify a scholar. That's how they will choose who to follow, who to listen to. So number one, لا يعرفون العلماء إلا بثياب حسن, بثوب حسن, بلبس حسن. Number two, and they won't recognize the Quran إلا بصوت حسن. In other words, an association's been made between the Quran and beautiful melodic recitation. Whereas the Quran, its essence isn't the way it's recited. In fact, we have a hadith against these newfound melodic, singing-like voices. We have traditions against this. Traditions tell us that when you recite the Quran, do so بصوت حزين, which I think in this day and age, the closest semblance to this is probably the Iraqi style, which is sad. The Prophet says that they will only recognize the Quran if it's recited in a very beautiful way. In other words, there's no focus on the content, on the essence of the Quran. The focus is on the voice. Number two. Number three, the Prophet says, وَلَا يَعْبُدُونَ اللَّهَ إِلَّا فِي شَهْرِ رَمَضَانِ. They will only worship Allah during the holy month of Ramadan. This is 1400 years ago. The Prophet then says that when that happens, tyrants will rule over them. Tyrants who lack mercy in their hearts and who are ignorant to the core. One thing leads to another. Another hadith by Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, كَيْفَ بِكُمْ. He quotes Rasulullah. He says, كَيْفَ بِكُمْ. What will you do on this day when it comes to you? كيف بكم إذا فسدت نساؤكم وفسق شبابكم ولم تأمروا بالمعروف ولم تنهوا عن المنكر. The day when your women will be spoiled. Spoiled meaning they will rot, which is probably something that explains the difference between فَسَدَتْ نِسَاؤُكُمْ وَفَسَقَ شَبَابُكُمْ. The difference is that the women will rot secretly on the inside. Shame and decency and these things will be eroded. Whereas with the men and the youth who are male, فَسَقُوا, they will outwardly and openly and conspicuously start committing sins in public. كَيْفَ بِكُمْ إِذَا فَسَدَتْ نِسَاؤُكُمْ وَفَسَقَ شَبَابُكُمْ وَلَمْ تَأْمُرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلَمْ تَنْهَوْا عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. It'll be a time when people stop enjoining the good and forbidding evil. Even though these are two obligatory acts in Islam that apply to everyone, not just the scholars, every single person. You see something evil being committed, a sin taking place, you have to speak out. At least as much as you possibly can, and given all the conditions that have to be satisfied. But ultimately, the obligation is there. Enjoin good, invite others to the way of Allah. It's salat time, everybody's sitting, talking, wasting time. Brothers, sisters, let's get up and pray. You see a sin being committed, tell them, speak out, frown, walk away. So they said to the Prophet, it's a famous hadith, they said to him, أَوَيَكُونُ ذَلِكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. Is that even possible? Could that day ever happen? The Prophet said, وَشَرٌ مِّن ذَلِكَ. It gets even worse. You think this is the worst of it? تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمُنْكَرِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمَعْرُوفِ. There will come a day when you will enjoin evil and forbid good. So they say to him, Ya Rasulullah, أَوَيَكُونُ ذَلِكَ? He said, وَشَرٌ مِّن ذَلِكَ. It gets even worse than that. Can you imagine? The Prophet said, تَرَوْنَ الْمَعْرُوفَ مُنْكَرًا وَالْمُنْكَرَ مَعْرُوفًا. There will come a day when you will see good as evil and evil as good. Not only will you command people to commit evil, no, you won't even see evil as evil. You'll see it as good. Your entire moral system will be deformed and transfigured and completely destroyed. These are hints, and I'm sure you're all intelligent enough to understand what we're talking about here and how we truly are in this phase of the end of days. So in these ahadith, the Prophet and the Imams have provided us with clear warnings that it's going to get really bad. And it's in those days that you need to take precautions.